There is a certain kind of love that doesn't run toward you, it circles you. Not because it doesn't feel something, not because it's incapable of depth, but because, deep down, it is afraid that love will cost it its freedom, its identity, its sense of self. And if you've ever found yourself drawn to someone like this, you know exactly how confusing it can feel. One moment they're close, the next they're distant. One moment they're warm, the next they're gone. But here's the truth most people miss. This isn't random behavior. This is a series of tests, not conscious, calculated games, but unconscious defenses. Protections built from past experiences that taught them. Love is dangerous. And if you don't understand these tests, you will fail them not because you're not enough, but because you're trying to win a game you don't even realize is being played. The first test is independence. They are asking, if I let you in, will I lose myself? And the moment you cling too tightly, demand too much, or make them the center of your world, you confirm their deepest fear. The answer is not to love less, it's to love from a place of fullness. When you have your own purpose, your own rhythm, your own life, you don't threaten their independence. You inspire it. The second test is consistency. Avoidant hearts have learned that people are unpredictable. That warmth can turn into withdrawal. That affection can disappear overnight. So they watch you, not for grand gestures, but for patterns. Do you show up the same way, even when it's not convenient? Do your actions match your words? Because consistency is what slowly teaches a guarded heart that it's safe to believe. The third test is emotional safety. They won't tell you outright that they're afraid. They'll hint at it. They'll reveal small pieces. And how you respond in those moments determines everything. If you judge, they retreat. If you overwhelm, they shut down. But if you meet their vulnerability with calm, understanding without trying to fix, rush, or analyze, you become a place where their walls no longer feel necessary. The fourth test is pressure. This is where most people lose. They pull away and you chase. They go quiet and you demand answers. And in doing so, you prove to them that closeness equals pressure. But when you can stand in your own calm, when you can give space without losing your center, you show them something rare. That love doesn't have to suffocate. The fifth test is self-sufficiency. They are drawn to people who want them, not people who need them, because need feels like responsibility, and responsibility feels like a trap. But when you are someone who chooses them not out of emptiness, but out of abundance, you become safe. The sixth test is conflict. Disagreement for them is dangerous territory. They are watching closely. Do you attack? Do you withdraw? Do you make them wrong? Or do you stay grounded, respectful, and open? Because if conflict feels safe, love becomes possible. And finally, the seventh test, the one that quietly sits beneath all the others, is patience. They are asking, without words, will you rush me or will you understand me? Because love for them is not a spark. It's a slow thaw. And here is where your power lies. You cannot force someone to feel safe. You cannot convince someone to open their heart. But you can become someone whose presence makes opening feel natural. This is not about playing games. This is about becoming grounded in your own value so deeply that you stop reacting and start responding with intention. Because the truth is, the right person doesn't need you to pass tests. But the person who has been hurt, who has built walls, who is learning how to trust again, they don't need perfection. They need certainty. They need steadiness. They need to feel that your presence is not another storm in their life, but a place of peace. And when you become that, not by abandoning yourself, but by strengthening yourself, you don't just hack their tests. You rise above them. And in doing so, you don't just attract love. You become the kind of love that feels like home. At the core of this test is a quiet but powerful question. Asterisk, if I let you get close to me, will I still belong to myself? Asterisk, for someone who values independence at a deep, almost protective level. Love has often been associated with loss of time, loss of control, loss of identity. So when they meet someone new, they're not just asking, do I like you? They're asking, will you take something from me I can't afford to lose? This is why you'll notice subtle reactions when you get too emotionally intense, too quickly. It's not always about you being too much. It's about what your intensity represents to them. If your world begins to revolve around them, if your happiness seems dependent on their presence, it can feel like a silent expectation is forming, one that says, you are now responsible for me. Asterisk, and that's the moment their instinct is to step back. The mistake many people make here is trying to prove their worth by giving more time, more attention, more reassurance. But paradoxically, the more you center your life around them, the more they feel the weight of that attention. It doesn't feel like love to them. It feels like pressure disguised as affection. What actually creates attraction and safety in this dynamic is the opposite, a grounded sense of self. When you have your own structure, your routines, your passions, your social circle, you communicate something incredibly powerful without saying a word. You show them that your life is already full and that they are being invited into it, not asked to complete it. This changes everything, because now, instead of feeling like they're stepping into a role where they must meet your emotional needs, they feel like they're stepping into a space where they are free to be themselves. There's no unspoken contract, no hidden demand, just connection. It's also important to understand that independence isn't just about physical space, it's emotional space. If every small shift in their behavior causes you to react questioning, over-analyzing, seeking constant reassurance, it signals that your emotional state is tied to their actions. And again, that creates a sense of responsibility they instinctively resist. But when you can experience closeness without losing your emotional center, you send a different message. Asterisk the first. Feels safe. That kind of presence feels safe. It doesn't threaten their autonomy, it respects it. There's also a deeper layer to this. People who guard their independence often admire it in others. They are drawn to individuals who are self-led, who make decisions confidently, who don't need permission to live their lives. When you demonstrate that kind of energy, you don't just pass the test, you become someone they genuinely respect. And respect, in this context, far more powerful than attraction alone. So instead of asking, how do I make them choose me? A better question is, am I choosing myself fully in this moment? Because the more you anchor into your own life, the less you feel the urge to chase, control, or seek validation. You move differently. You communicate differently. You exist in the connection with a sense of calm certainty, rather than anxious urgency. And that calm is what allows them to lean in. Because for the first time, they don't feel like love is something that will take away their freedom. They begin to feel like love might actually coexist with it. At the heart of this test is a quiet observation. Asterisk, can I rely on who you are? Or will you change once I start to trust you? Asterisk, for someone who has learned to be cautious in love, inconsistency isn't just disappointing, it's destabilizing. It reinforces a belief they already carry, that people are unpredictable, and that emotional safety can disappear without warning. So they pay attention not to the grand, impressive moments, but to the small, repeated ones. How you show up on an ordinary day matters far more than what you do on a special one. Anyone can be charming, attentive, and present in the beginning, but they are looking for something deeper than charm. They are looking for evidence of steadiness. This is where many people unintentionally fail. In the early stages, they come on strong. There's excitement, energy, constant communication. But over time, that intensity fades or becomes inconsistent. Messages become sporadic. Plans get cancelled. Effort fluctuates depending on mood or convenience. And while this may seem normal to you, to them it confirms a deeper fear. Here it is again, the shift I was expecting. Asterisk, inconsistency doesn't just create distance, it creates doubt. And doubt makes it nearly impossible for them to relax into connection. Instead of leaning in, they begin to hold back, preparing themselves for the moment things fall apart. What builds trust, on the other hand, is reliability. Not perfection, but predictability in your character. When your words and actions align over time, you become someone they can start to understand. And understanding is the first step towards safety. This doesn't mean you have to be rigid or robotic. It means that your presence carries a sense of calm dependability. If you say you'll call, you call. If you make a plan, you honor it. If something changes, you communicate it clearly, rather than disappearing or leaving them guessing. These may seem like simple behaviors, but to someone who is testing for consistency, they carry enormous weight. There's also an emotional consistency they are observing. Do you react dramatically when things don't go your way? Do your moods swing in a way that feels unpredictable? Or do you handle situations with a level of groundedness that makes you feel safe to be around? Because emotional volatility can feel just as threatening as physical absence. If they sense that your reactions are intense, unpredictable, or dependent on external circumstances, they may begin to associate closeness with instability. And again, their instinct will be to step back. Consistency in this sense is about emotional self-regulation. It's the ability to remain centered even when things aren't perfect. When you can do that, you create an environment where they don't feel like they have to brace themselves for sudden changes. Another subtle layer of this test is time. Anyone can be consistent for a week or two, but they are watching to see if your behavior holds over a longer period. Do you maintain your effort once the initial excitement fades? Do you continue to show up even when it's no longer new or effortless? Because for them, love isn't proven in intensity, it's proven in endurance. And here's the deeper truth. Consistency isn't something you perform for them. It's something that naturally emerges when you are aligned with yourself, when your actions reflect your values, when your words are intentional, when your behavior isn't driven by fleeting emotions. You become someone who is steady by nature. That steadiness becomes incredibly attractive, not because it's flashy or dramatic, but because it feels rare. It feels trustworthy. And when someone who has spent a long time guarding their heart begins to trust that your presence won't suddenly shift, won't disappear, won't turn unpredictable, that's when something inside them begins to soften. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, and meaningfully. Because for the first time, they are experiencing a connection that doesn't feel like a risk to their stability. It feels like something they can stand on. At the center of this test is a deeply human question they rarely say out loud. Asterisk, if I show you who I really am, my fears, my doubts, the parts I've learned to hide, will you handle it with care, or will you use it against me? Asterisk, for someone who has learned to protect themselves, vulnerability is not natural, it's negotiated, measured, and released in small, almost invisible increments. You won't always notice when this test is happening. It doesn't come as a dramatic confession. It shows up in subtle ways. A slightly more honest answer than usual. A passing comment about something that hurt them. A moment where their guard drops just enough for you to glimpse what's underneath. These are not random moments, they are invitations. And how you respond in these moments determines whether they move closer or retreat. The mistake many people make is thinking they need to fix what's being shared. They jump into problem-solving mode, offering advice, solutions, or interpretations. But to someone testing emotional safety, this can feel overwhelming. It can feel like their experience is being managed, rather than understood. What they are really looking for is something far simpler, yet far more powerful. Presence. The ability to listen without interrupting, without correcting, without trying to steer the conversation toward a resolution. When you allow their feelings to exist without trying to change them, you create a safe space for them to express themselves. You communicate something profound. Asterisk, you are allowed to be exactly as you are in this moment. Asterisk, there's also a sensitivity to judgment. Even subtle reactions, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, a quick shift in subject can signal that it's not safe to go deeper. And once that signal is received, the walls go back up, often stronger than before. Emotional safety is built when your response carries acceptance rather than evaluation. When you don't label their feelings as overreactions or minimize their experiences, you create space for honesty to grow. It's not about agreeing with everything they say, it's about respecting that their inner world makes sense to them. Another layer of this test is confidentiality, whether spoken or unspoken. When someone shares something vulnerable, they are also asking, will you hold this with integrity? Asterisk, if they sense that their words might be repeated, joked about, or used as leverage in a future disagreement, trust erodes instantly. Safety requires a sense of protection, the feeling that what is shared in openness will not become a weapon later. There is also the pace of vulnerability. Many people, in an effort to create closeness, try to accelerate this process. They push for deeper conversations, ask probing questions, or reveal intense personal details early on, hoping it will encourage reciprocity. But for someone who values emotional safety, this can feel intrusive. It can feel like being pulled into a depth they're not ready for. Respecting their pace is essential. When you allow vulnerability to unfold naturally, without forcing it, you communicate patience and respect. You show them that you are not trying to extract something from them, you are simply available when they are ready to offer it. Your emotional reactions also play a crucial role. If their vulnerability triggers anxiety, defensiveness, or discomfort in you, they will feel it. Even if you don't say anything explicitly, the shift in your energy can signal that their openness has created instability. But when you remain grounded, calm, attentive, and emotionally present, you become someone who can hold space without being shaken by it. And that kind of presence is rare. Over time, as these moments accumulate, something begins to change. The small disclosures become slightly bigger. The guarded tone softens. The pauses between words become less tense. It's not a sudden transformation, it's a gradual unfolding. Because what you are building is not just connection, it's trust at the deepest level. And when someone who has spent so long protecting themselves begins to feel that their inner world is not only accepted but safe in your presence, they don't just open up. They begin to feel at home in a way they haven't felt before. At the core of this test is a silent question. If I step back, will you try to pull me closer, or will you trust the space between us? Asterisk for someone who has learned to associate closeness with pressure. Moments of distance are not signs of disinterest. They are moments of regulation. They are ways of regaining a sense of control when things begin to feel too intense. And this is where many connections begin to unravel. Because when they pull back even slightly, it often triggers anxiety in the other person. Suddenly, there's overthinking. Asterisk, did I do something wrong? Asterisk, messages become more frequent, more urgent. There's a need to close the gap as quickly as possible. But what feels like an attempt to restore connection to you feels like pressure to them. Pressure, in this context, isn't always obvious. It's not just ultimatums or demands. It can be subtle. Repeatedly asking where things are going, needing constant reassurance, reacting strongly to delayed responses, or trying to define the relationship before it has had space to naturally evolve. Each of these behaviors, while understandable, can feel like an attempt to control the pace of intimacy. And control is exactly what they are trying to avoid. So when they sense that pressure building, their instinct is not to lean in, it's to create more distance. Not because they don't care, but because they need to breathe. They need to feel that they can step away without losing everything. The paradox here is powerful. The more you try to secure closeness, the more you risk pushing it away. What actually allows connection to grow is your ability to remain steady in the face of that distance. When they take a step back, and you don't immediately chase, question, or react, you communicate something deeply reassuring. Asterisk, your need for space does not threaten me. Asterisk, that message changes the dynamic completely. Because now, instead of feeling like they have to defend their boundaries, they feel understood. And when someone feels understood, they no longer need to protect themselves as fiercely. This doesn't mean you ignore your own needs or suppress your feelings. It means you respond rather than react. If something genuinely concerns you, you can express it calmly and clearly, without urgency or accusation. The difference is in the energy behind your words. Are you seeking connection, or are you trying to eliminate discomfort? When your communication comes from a place of grounded clarity, rather than emotional urgency, it feels safe. It doesn't corner them. It invites them. There's also a deeper layer to this test, trust in timing. They are observing whether you can allow the relationship to unfold without forcing it into a predefined structure. When you try to accelerate intimacy through constant contact, intense emotional exchanges, or premature commitment, you unintentionally create a sense of imbalance. It feels like too much, too soon. But when you allow space, real, genuine space, you create room for curiosity to grow. You give them the opportunity to miss you, to think about you, to come toward you on their own terms. And that movement, when it comes from them, is far more meaningful than anything that is pulled or pressured. Another important aspect is how you handle uncertainty. Distance often brings ambiguity, and ambiguity can be uncomfortable. But your ability to sit with that uncertainty, without immediately trying to resolve it, demonstrates emotional strength. It shows that you are not dependent on constant reassurance to feel secure. And that kind of security is magnetic, because for someone who fears being overwhelmed, your calm presence becomes a safe place. A place where they don't feel rushed, managed, or controlled. A place where they can approach at their own pace without fear of losing themselves in the process. Over time, this creates a shift. The space that once felt necessary begins to feel less urgent. The distance becomes shorter. The pullback becomes less frequent. Not because you forced it, but because you allowed it. And in that allowance, you showed them something they may not have experienced before. That closeness doesn't have to come with pressure. That love can exist without urgency. And that being with you doesn't mean losing their freedom, it means discovering a connection that respects it. At the center of this test is a quiet evaluation. Asterisk, are you standing on your own 2 feet? Or are you looking for me to hold you up? Asterisk, for someone who values distance as a form of protection, the idea of becoming someone's emotional anchor can feel overwhelming. Not because they lack care, but because they fear being responsible for another person's sense of stability. So they watch how you live your life when they're not at the center of it. They notice how you spend your time, what excites you, what you pursue, and how you handle your own emotions. And without saying it directly, they're asking, if I step away for a moment, do you still feel whole? This is where many people unintentionally create imbalance. In the early stages of connection, it's natural to feel drawn in. You want to talk more, see them more, think about them often. But when that pull turns into dependence, when your mood begins to rise and fall based on their attention, it subtly communicates that your emotional state is now tied to them. And to someone who fears being needed in that way, this doesn't feel flattering. It feels like a weight they didn't agree to carry. Neediness, in this context, isn't about having needs, it's about losing your center in the presence of someone else. It's when your world begins to shrink around the connection, and other parts of your life start to fade into the background. Your routines become inconsistent, your passions take a back seat, your sense of direction becomes unclear. What they are drawn to, instead, is someone who is already in motion, someone who has a life that exists independently of the relationship, not as a performance, but as a genuine expression of who they are. When you have your own goals, your own interests, your own social connections, you send a powerful message. Was choose you, but I do not depend on you to feel complete. And that distinction is everything. Because choice feels free. Dependence feels binding. There's also an emotional aspect to self-sufficiency. It's not just about having a busy life, it's about how you handle your internal world. Do you rely on them to soothe your anxiety, to validate your worth, to give you a sense of direction? Or do you take responsibility for your own emotional well-being? When you can regulate your emotions, when you can process your feelings without immediately seeking external reassurance, you become someone who feels stable. And stability, to someone who fears entanglement, is incredibly attractive. It tells them that being with you doesn't mean stepping into chaos or unpredictability. It means joining someone who is already grounded. Another subtle layer of this test is admiration. People who guard their independence often respect it deeply in others. They are drawn to individuals who make decisions with confidence, who pursue what matters to them, who don't wait for permission to live fully. When you embody that energy, you don't just pass the test, you become someone they look up to. And admiration creates a different kind of attraction, one that is rooted in respect rather than just emotion. It's also important to recognize that self-sufficiency doesn't mean emotional distance. You can be open, warm, and connected while still maintaining your sense of self. In fact, the healthiest form of connection comes from two people who are whole on their own, choosing to share their lives rather than merge them completely. When you bring that kind of presence into the dynamic, something shifts. They no longer feel like they have to protect themselves from being needed too much. They begin to relax, to engage more freely, to invest without the fear of losing control. Because what they experience with you is not a demand, it's an invitation. An invitation to be part of something that adds to their life, rather than consumes it. And in that space where there is no pressure to carry, no expectation to fix, no burden to fulfill, they begin to feel something unfamiliar yet deeply appealing. That being close to someone doesn't have to mean losing themselves. It can mean standing beside someone who has already found their own ground. At the heart of this test is a question that rarely gets spoken, but is always being felt. When things go wrong between us, will I be safe, or will it become something I have to escape? For someone who is naturally cautious in love, conflict isn't just an uncomfortable moment, it's a potential threat to the entire connection. It represents the possibility of chaos, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. So they pay very close attention to how you handle disagreement. Not when everything is going well, not when the energy is light and easy, but in those moments where expectations aren't met, where something feels off, where tension begins to rise. Because it's in those moments that your emotional patterns reveal themselves most clearly. Many people, without realizing it, approach conflict in ways that escalate rather than resolve. They raise their voice, become defensive, assign blame, or try to win the argument. Others go in the opposite direction. They shut down, withdraw, avoid the issue altogether, hoping it will disappear on its own. Both of these responses, though different on the surface, send a similar message. This is not a safe space to work through difficulty. And when that message is received, the instinct is to retreat. For someone who already associates closeness with risk, intense, or unresolved conflict reinforces the idea that intimacy leads to instability. It confirms their belief that getting too close will eventually result in emotional discomfort they'd rather avoid. What creates a different experience entirely is groundedness. Groundedness in conflict means you don't lose yourself when tension appears. You don't let your emotions dictate your behavior in a way that harms the connection. Instead, you stay present. You listen. You respond with intention rather than impulse. When something bothers you, you express it clearly but calmly. You speak from your own experience rather than attacking theirs. There's a difference between saying, "You never listened to me," and saying, "I felt unheard in that moment, and it mattered to me." *1 invites defensiveness. The other invites understanding. This shift in communication is powerful because it removes the sense of threat. It tells them that disagreement doesn't mean destruction, it means dialogue. Another important aspect is your ability to listen without immediately trying to defend yourself. When they share something that's uncomfortable to hear, do you interrupt, justify, or dismiss? Or do you allow them to fully express their perspective, even if you don't agree with it? Being heard is one of the most fundamental human needs. And when someone feels that their voice matters even in disagreement, it lowers their guard. It makes conflict feel less like a battle and more like a process of understanding. There's also the element of emotional regulation. Conflict often triggers strong feelings: frustration, disappointment, anger. But how you manage those feelings determines the tone of the interaction. If your emotions escalate quickly, if your reactions feel intense or unpredictable, it can create an environment that feels unsafe. But when you can acknowledge your emotions without being consumed by them, you create stability. You show that, even in moments of tension, you remain someone who can be trusted not to lose control. Another subtle layer of this test is resolution. It's not just about how conflict begins, it's about how it ends. Do you hold on to resentment? Do you bring up past issues repeatedly? Or are you able to move forward once something has been addressed? Carrying unresolved tension into future interactions creates a sense of unpredictability. It makes the connection feel fragile, but when conflict is handled, understood, and then released, it builds confidence. It shows that challenges can be navigated without damaging the relationship. Over time, these experiences begin to reshape their perception of closeness. What once felt risky starts to feel manageable. What once felt threatening begins to feel safe. Because they are no longer bracing themselves for conflict, they are experiencing it as something that can be handled with care. And when someone realizes that being close to you doesn't mean entering a space of chaos, but rather a space where even difficult moments are met with respect and calm, something shifts inside them. They stop seeing conflict as a reason to pull away and start seeing it as something that can actually deepen connection. At the center of this test is a quiet, almost unspoken question. Will you try to rush what I'm not ready to give? Or can you meet me where I am without turning it into pressure? For someone who moves carefully in love, timing is everything. Not because they don't feel, but because feeling for them can be overwhelming if it arrives too quickly. They don't trust intensity. They trust time. And this is where many people lose their footing. There's a natural desire to define things, to understand where it's going, to secure some form of certainty. You want to know, what are we? Where is this heading? How do you feel about me? These are valid questions. But when they are asked too early or too often, they can feel like an attempt to accelerate something that hasn't had the chance to form organically. To you, it feels like clarity. To them, it feels like pressure. Because underneath those questions, what they often hear is, decide now, be sure now, commit now, and if they're not there. Yet, the instinct is not to move forward, it's to step back. Patience, in this dynamic, is not passive waiting. It's active trust. It's the ability to stay present in what is unfolding without trying to control what it should become. It's choosing connection in the moment rather than constantly evaluating the future. This doesn't mean ignoring your needs or silencing your voice. It means understanding the difference between expressing a desire and demanding a timeline. When you communicate from a place of openness, I enjoy where this is going, and I'm looking for something meaningful, you create space. But when it becomes, I need to know exactly where this is headed right now, it creates tension. The energy behind your words matters as much as the words themselves. There's also a deeper emotional layer to patience, your relationship with uncertainty. When things are not clearly defined, it can bring up doubt, insecurity, even fear. And if you're not comfortable holding that uncertainty, you'll naturally try to resolve it as quickly as possible. But your ability to sit with the unknown, without letting it destabilize you, is what creates a sense of calm in the connection. It shows that you are not driven by urgency, that you are not trying to force clarity before it naturally emerges. And that calm is incredibly disarming. Because now, instead of feeling like they're being evaluated or rushed, they feel like they're being allowed to explore, to feel, to understand their own emotions at a pace that doesn't overwhelm them. Another subtle aspect of this test is how you respond to slow progression. If things aren't moving as quickly as you'd like, do you become frustrated, distant, or reactive? Or do you remain steady, continuing to show up with the same level of presence and care? Consistency over time, without escalation or withdrawal, communicates something powerful. Asterisk the first, not because I need immediate results. Asterisk that kind of energy removes pressure from the connection. It transforms it from something that needs to be figured out quickly into something that can be experienced fully. There's also an element of trust in the process itself. When you allow things to unfold, you give space for genuine feelings to develop on both sides. You're not trying to extract a decision, you're allowing a realization to occur. And realizations that come naturally are far more stable than decisions made under pressure. Over time, as they experience this lack of urgency, something begins to shift. The guardedness softens. The need to create distance becomes less intense. Because they are no longer trying to protect themselves from being rushed, they are simply engaging in something that feels manageable. And in that space, where there is no countdown, no expectation to arrive at a destination before they're ready, they begin to move closer. Not because they were pushed, but because for the first time they feel like they can take their time and still be met with understanding. Thank you for taking the time to be here and invest in your growth that truly matters. Wishing you clarity, strength, and meaningful connections ahead. Goodbye for now.